Great, I see our panelists are all back and looking sharp. So let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to today's virtual CMMC Summit session on CMMC compliance for higher education. I'm Brian Kelly, Director of the Cybersecurity Program at EDUCAUSE, and I'll be your moderator for this session. I'd like to thank EDUCAUSE and PreVeil. Would like to thank our speakers and welcome our speakers. Karlton D. Johnson, Vice Chairman and CMMC-AB from the Board of Directors. Thank you, Karlton, for stepping in last minute. We were supposed to have Ty, and he was unable to make it, so we appreciate you being with us today. Jodi, the CISO at the University of Hawaii, getting up early to join us. Thank you. And Mike Korn, the CISO at the University of California, San Diego. Michael, always a pleasure. For our attendees today, please go ahead and use the Q&A for questions. We're going to have some questions for our panelists first, and then we're going to try to finish up with questions from our attendees. So be sure to use that function. If you have any technical difficulties or challenges, feel free to use chat for our tech support. And the session is also being recorded. With that, let's get started. Karlton, thanks again for joining us today. The higher education community is excited about the opportunity to engage in a dialogue with not only you, with the CMMC-AB and in the DoD on CMMC. We're really excited, appreciate you being here with us today to talk through it. And with that, I guess my first question is, can you start by giving us sort of an update on CMMC-AB and your perspective on how you see the CMMC-AB working with the university research community?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Got a lot to tell. I'll try to be concise and in mind of the other people who want to get a talk and say in here. So I'll give you kind of a highlight of how we formed, where we've been, and answer the direct question about universities. Let's start with the intent and a reminder of how the AB was formed. We started back in November of last year. DoD said, frankly, we want industry to get together and figure out how to address this issue. And we want you to self-actualize and form an organization that can implement the CMMC standard. So starting in January, we established an all-volunteer board. We established a 501c nonprofit, which is still in process. And starting with approximately 15 volunteers. These are people, men and women, who have worked in the industry across the board, ranging from small, big, medium companies, defense, otherwise. And they've all donated their time to be part of this. The primary mission of the CMMC is to issue the CMMC standard in or implement the CMMC standard in a very clear, very consumable, and very consistent method that supports the actualization of the organization seeking certification, what we call the OSCs, and helping them get into the ecosystem for CMMC certifications and allow them to get the DoD contract, or help enable them to help get the DoD contracts. What's happened in the last 9 months? There's been a lot, so I'm just going to summarize. Number one, we have identified and implemented. We have 309 C3PEOs, certified third-party assessors, that have come on board, signed up, and they're now in the ecosystem. We have just also completed our first training of assessors, approximately 25 assessors, going to go up to 70 in the initial provisional standard. And then the thing I think you'll be most interested in, and I want to segue this into the university piece, we have a program that's called the Licensed Partner Professionals or Publishers. And this is really going to be the first wave of organizations that are going to help support the certification process within our training curriculum. And this is pretty exciting for us because now we have partners that are in this together and can help us. So over the next few months, this is what you're going to see with the LPPs. The LPPs will take the exam objectives that we have established for CMMC. They'll help create educational curricula for that and map those back to the objectives so that the assessors can use them and help others to meet them. The LPPs will also, if this works out right, which we intend it to, have the option and flexibility of creating content in multiple formats. So that's going to be video, print, publication, ebooks, and the like, to include also instructor-led asynchronous or synchronous learning. Once that criteria and content is developed, then we, the CMMC-AB, are going to have an independent third-party quality assurance team that ensures the quality of that content, make sure that it's viable and meets the standards. And then we'll go forth with continuing to have the AB selecting the exam agency who's going to help deliver this. Now, why is the LPP program important to you? From an AB perspective, and I should have said this up front, when we established the organization for the CMMC-AB, we actually do have established, or at least identified, 3 advisory groups. One of those is going to be the academic and academia advisory team. And so the things we're going to talk about today, the issues and concerns that come forth, I'm looking for people to buy into that and bring those issues and concerns forward and be part of the solution to help address them for you. And then from an LPT and LPP perspective, licensed training providers, universities can partner with those, with the AB, LPPs and LPTs to provide that certified education for students. So there's a lot of opportunity to play and a lot of ability to be part of the ecosystem.
As I was muted and out of respect and kept talking. Thank you, Karlton, much appreciated. And Jodi, we're gonna move to you next for your opening thoughts. And I know you, along with the University of Hawaii, have been on a journey with the DoD sort of long before CMMC. So, interested to sort of hear what you can provide, if you can provide some background on how higher ed research community is different from the DIB in your experience over the years prior to CMMC a little bit.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and aloha from Hawaii. I think the largest difference between the defense industrial base and universities and colleges, basically higher education institutions in general, is that our basic mission is research, teaching and learning, and service. And for us to achieve these missions, we have to foster the free and open exchange of ideas and information to create new knowledge, and also to provide a safe environment for discussions, discourse, and even dissension. And as a result, the cultures within our higher education institutions are very open and widely accessible. And this is initially by design. And I say initially because times are a-changing, and we do know that we have to adjust. However, just here at the university, for the longest time, we really resisted implementing a border firewall because that was just another device impediment that could potentially impact the speed of our research networks. We still have a largely predominantly flat network with mostly public IP addresses, and the control of devices and the network itself is highly decentralized. So here we would actually allocate a block of IP addresses to a unit for them to use however they see fit. And therefore they control the devices or manage the devices that appear on their networks. We at the institution, like the system level, we are starting to implement tools and technologies to help us at least block some of the major attacks that could be coming in from outside, as well as to block some of the attacks occurring from the inside. So, higher education and academic institutions have been widely publicized as being places where attackers are looking to infiltrate, again, because of our open culture. And we understand that there is a need now. As I said, things are changing as evidenced by CMMC being spun up so quickly. But some of our concerns are that how do we apply CMMC to those parts of our institutions where it needs to be applied? We have a wide range, and I think Mike will talk a little bit about this, is, some of these research and innovations and discussions are not related to the Department of Defense at all. And so originally we had heard that perhaps CMMC level 1 might have to be applied across our entire institution, which for us is of great concern because that's going to be incredibly expensive and maybe potentially impossible. So going back a little bit to the differences between DIBS and higher education, and back to my involvement with the Department of Defense, is back in 2017, my institution was actually targeted, and we suspect by a hostile nation state. And they were able to infiltrate part of our research network, and we were working with the other organizations who are targeted similarly, as well as Department of Defense, as well as some of our federal law enforcement partners. And it became clear very quickly that there were differences in our higher education institutions networks that was not fully understood by the DoD and our federal law enforcement partners. So as an example, we were told that we should block all network traffic to and from that hostile nation state. But we have students from those places. We have ongoing academic engagements and collaborative research with those places. So we cannot just arbitrarily just cut off all traffic going in and out of those countries. So, you know, we tried to explain, and I have to admit, it was let's see, an animated discussion with our federal partners. And I think that they still had a lot of trouble understanding, you know, what we do and why we're so different. Why can't we just cut off that traffic just because? They also wanted us to hand over, you know, several days or weeks of full packet captures for our entire university network. And, you know, again, as higher ed, where we create these safe environments for free and open discussion, you know, our community is very hesitant about, you know, sharing. Again, packet captures is all of the traffic going in and out of our network. And to us, that is something that is not possible to do. So, you know, we tried to work with our federal law enforcement partners to provide them with what information we could. And we appreciated their input and providing us a little bit more information about the actual threat actors. But definitely there are differences. And so for us, looking at this whole CMMC, it's almost as what parts of our network do we apply it to? And so when we hear about things, and again, it's rumors, we're not sure how it's actually going to be interpreted or defined, is, you know, does CMMC level 1 have to be applied across our entire network? Or is it truly follow the data model? So those are some of the things that I've experienced personally, but also just to provide a quick overview as to the distinct differences between higher ed and DIB.
Thanks, Jodi. Karlton, do you want to jump in? I do have a question for Mike, and we can continue. I just want to give you an opportunity if you wanted to add anything.
I'm going to say fire there and let Mike speak, but to the point, I do have some thoughts on that, but I want to get Mike a chance to get in first, and then I'll come back.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Let me follow up very quickly to Jodi's comment, because this is an issue that we've dealt with, not just with the DoD, but many external agencies. They want to look at us as a business. And, you know, the question is, why are we not an ordinary member of the defense industrial base? I like to describe us as more akin to a municipality. So are we a business? Sure, we have banking function. Are we a hospitality business? Yes, we've got 10,000 kids living in dorms. Are we an athletic business? Yes, we're NCAA Division I. We own a fleet of ships that go out at sea. We've got a multi-billion-dollar health system, so we do patient care. And I think it's important not to lose track of that diversity of function as we're trying to respond to the CMMC needs. And this goes to Jodi's point, is that all of us, whether it's, you know, basic cybersecurity, or any of us that are dealing with, you know, somewhat restricted resources, we have to take a risk-centric approach. And that's why, you know, when it calls out in the CMMC spec that the compliance envelope follows the data, we're comfortable with that. We understand that. But that's how we need to operate going forward, or else, as Jodi said, we end up having to spend essential resources securing our dance department, securing our theater department. And those are things that need to happen, but not at the expense of our CUI protections.
So to I'm trying to think of how to address this, and I guess I'll just say what's coming top of my mind. First of all, you're both absolutely right. And as a person who sat on the other side of defense and DoD, and I mean, actually seeing the adversary, up close, seeing what they do, when a government / DoD / military person comes in, they're going to have that threat vector check, because in their business, it's lives being lost. And so they take that cybersecurity to a different level. The challenge is exactly as you pushed it out. The educational and the higher education institution is a different culture. It's a more open, it's a more sharing culture. And so the conversation, I think, begins with the baselining of what exactly we're trying to protect. If you have CUI, yeah, there's no question. You have to protect the CUI. And wherever that's going through the enterprise, it has to be protected. There's just no way around it. If it's dance department information, well, is that really critical? Well, what exactly is information? So that data classification strategy falls into it, I believe. And then when you look at the CMMC levels, level 1 and level 2, it's very clear how you want to protect that. To the other point about how you segment that out, if you only have this information you want to protect in a certain area, maybe you can enclave that. There are different solutions, but again, it's a conversation. But if you go beyond that, you go into an enterprise, that's when it becomes more challenging. So I would offer this, and I'll throw out a couple of things. One, from a CMMC perspective, we clearly recognize that academia is just like all of us, significantly impacted by the COVID environment. And what we've seen is that the costs have skyrocketed for things that people just didn't have to do before. So we clearly understand that. That said, we also understand that academic institutions won't have the same level of certification as what we call a prime, like a Lockheed Martin or Boeing or Northrop. That level of certification, though, has to be driven by the role that the academic institution plays in the procurement process in particular. So if there's content that is part of the procurement process to support government programs, that information is going to be protected at a higher level. And as you follow that data, where that data goes, there goes CMMC, at least at a CMMC level 3. A level 1 and 2 really is basic cyber hygiene, and most organizations will do those as part of the course. What I'd offer also, and again, this is when it becomes a challenge, I would start by taking the NIST 800-171 guidance, which the DoD has issued out prior to CMMC, and use that as your initial baseline and just test the waters. See what you think you can do and what you can't do. And then based off of what we just talked about, the information, protecting the right type of information, then have the conversation with the government of how do we now embrace the CMMC perspective for these very segments of our enterprise or enterprise writ large.
And I think you hit it right on the head there. I think what all of us would like to see more of is maybe the CMMC-AB can help with this. I personally don't feel, other than working with my contract officers, that we've got a seat at a table where that conversation can take place. And I think that's fairly easy to remedy, but I think CMMC-AB could help with that.
And that's what, I'm glad you said that, because that's what I was trying to communicate earlier, in that on our organizational structure for the AB, we identified this back in January, actually November. We want to have a academic or academia interface council so that these conversations can happen, because we clearly understood, and I think, Jodi, you were alluding to this, from an attack vector, the higher education organizations are a clear attack vector, especially because of their openness. But these challenges we're talking about have to be in the calculus. So we wanted to have academia at the table. And so we're going to push forward on that. I'm taking a personal note today to see how we can accelerate that. There's been a lot of work with the CMMC, a lot of trying to get ready for the actual assessments, but this is something that we need to look at. So I'm taking an action to figure out how we can get there sooner than later.
That's excellent. It's almost out of, I think that's how we were going to finish, but we'll come back to that, Karlton. Thank you for that. And it's like as if you guys are sort of reading the mind of the moderator. So Mike, you had talked a little bit about carving out sort of, you're not worried about your dance classes and that side. Can you talk a little bit about the approaches you've already taken? I know, Karlton, you talked about 800, 171, and what are some of the things, Mike, that you're doing already sort of in the absence of CMMC that will better position you and UC San Diego to be compliant as we move forward?
Absolutely. I think it's important to point out that as was said earlier in the webinar, we've had CUI obligations for a while. And we work very closely with our contracts and grants people to track exactly which contracts call out CUI obligations. The contracts people do a good job of negotiating that appropriately. Often a program officer will try to just apply it broadly in ways that aren't really appropriate. So we tackle that. But when we started going down the road of CMMC, we really sort of divided this up into two paths. One, we looked at it from a compliance, policy perspective, and the other, we looked at it from a technical perspective. So the first thing we did was we put together a fairly senior level group, research administrators, critical faculty, export control, and we started drafting a policy for the institution on how we were going to manage CUI and CMMC data. And it's a very simple policy, really. It basically does what all policy does. It deals with governance, responsibility, and authority. And it says we're going to put together a governance group that will approve, must approve anyone wanting to be a CMMC service provider. It puts into place representation for the institution, basically a way to track how we're doing on this overall. At the same time, we put together a technical working group to tackle this from an operational perspective and develop a portfolio of CMMC services. Now, we were fortunate that we had San Diego Supercomputing, which already maintains a FISMA moderate environment. And they have committed to being a CMMC level 3 certified environment and provide that service out not just to San Diego researchers, but as well within the UC system. And they will do this also for others that reach out to them once they get their certification. So what we've done at this point is identify what we think is going to be the portfolio to get started with. We realize that we have a very big DoD footprint here, mostly because of our Marine organization. And we can't boil the ocean. It's just too expensive to tackle everybody in advance when it's necessary. So what we've done is we've procured and deployed a O365 GCC High instance. We're using a third party to help manage that. We have San Diego Supercomputing, which is going to be helping us with remote virtual desktops. We think VDI is the endpoint solution. And we've identified the two major labs that really do mostly defense work, that deal with a lot of CUI. And that bundle is where we're going to start with our CMMC analysis. We're moving into an implementation phase now. We're going to work with a partner to do a gap assessment and develop a POAM for that sort of pyramid I just outlined. And then as we see more contracts showing up, we will fold them into the portfolio. So it's been quite a lot of work. COVID really disrupted us there for about 4 or 5 months. But like I say, we're turning back around now and really starting to look at how we're going to deploy and manage those endpoints. I'm not really worried about the enclaves because they're fairly mature. They have very clean boundaries. What's going to be a bigger challenge are all the labs where they build things, they drag them through the ocean, they sit on ships. And as we talked earlier, these research labs, they support regulated and non-regulated research. They've got students from all over the world working in them. And we really would find it virtually impossible to say, take all of the labs doing regulated CUI work and give them a special space. You know, that would be kind of ideal, but it's logistically impossible for us to do that. So it's really that last mile question, the labs, that are going to be the most challenging. And unfortunately, CMMC feels kind of mute on that subject. And this is the kind of area I think we could discuss quite a bit with the DoD and the CMMC board.
Well, before we go into the next question, can I just throw out something?
Sure.
So let me commit to this today. Start sending those questions to the CMMC-AB now. And what I'll commit to is that as we get this in, we're going to put those into the rack and stack to answer. And as we start building out that capability I talked about, you know, sooner or later, try to get into the meat of this and figure it out. So I'll commit to that today. So just start sending those questions to us. And we'll
Terrific.
Thank you. That's awesome.
And one additional thing, and I guess I'll say this way. I recognize that the CMMC piece is a heavy lift for all the right reasons. One of the things that personally keeps me up at night is the openness that happens in our younger generation today, i.e. as they're using technology. I mean, it's a simple thing. You get an iPhone, you go in, you set it up, and they're just used to it. But the challenge with that is one or two things. You either have to secure the back end, so it's so simple, anybody can do it, and they don't have to worry about security. They're forced to do automatic password changes and so forth, which is nirvana. Or you have to have a combination of education so that they understand how to do this, and you have enough technology in place and standards to protect it. And so one of the things I like about CMMC, one of many things I like about CMMC, is starting with level one, there's that baselining understanding so that everybody kind of gets better together. And so once again, I'd offer from the institution perspective, recognizing that last, what I used to call the last tactical mile, you mentioned the research centers, recognizing that that's an endpoint challenge, starting out with the level one piece and just seeing where you are, and then attempting to go to that level two. If you have CUI, controlled and classified information, you got to do the other part. But I submit, just start out with that, and then let's look at what the challenges are. And again, start to educate the customer base, the students in this case, to help them understand they're part of the cyber solution. They just people take it for granted today. And so we just got to figure that out.
You know, it's interesting. One of the things that that CMMC has helped us with, we recognize, and I think higher ed recognizes, that from a cybersecurity perspective, the research endeavor, the research mission, is a difficult one to challenge for all, to secure for a host of reasons. Yeah. What we've done recently is launch a self-certification program that's going to be required of all of the faculty and non-faculty researchers, where we basically obligate them to meet a few of our controls, and we encourage a handful of others, but we require them to certify that they're meeting this standard. So what that means is that a year from now, when that program comes to fruition, we will know the status and the disposition of all the research labs. And we have about 1,500 of them here in a way that we never have had in the past. And we're requiring instrumentation of machines that can support our instrumentation, anti-malware, vulnerability identification. We have all this up on assure.ucsd.edu. And it's basically, the baseline is mapped CMMC level 1, that basic hygiene. So even though we're not really requiring the CMMC level 1 in all the research labs, we're leaning toward that. And the CMMC alignment helps sell that to the campus.
Excellent.
Thanks, Mike. And I was just going to come back to Jodi. I have this nagging journey metaphor, and you had mentioned earlier the incident that you had with the nation state. And, I just wonder if there's lessons learned from that incident or other engagements where, there's applicability for moving toward the next journey, right? We all learn from, where to go and where to eat and what not to do on our trips. Is there something that you think that might be valuable for the attendees to maybe take away from that when they're thinking about CMMC compliance?
So absolutely. One of the things that we do here at the University of Hawaii, we actually do talk about our incidents, especially to our community here, because they have to understand that when we implement new policies and procedures and requirements within the institution, we're doing it for a reason. And nothing better to show them that, hey, this is what happened. These are our concerns. And these are also concerns of our federal partners and Department of Defense partners as well. And collectively, we as the entire University of Hawaii system, and we are a multi-campus system, every one of us plays a part in securing our institutional assets, which includes now research data. So, some of the lessons learned is definitely an awareness component. We have to do a good job about educating not just the students, but also the faculty and staff as to their responsibilities and what they need to do and why they need to follow our processes and procedures. And getting in front of those communities is hard, again, because we're highly decentralized. So I don't often have the audience, let's say, of the research principal investigators. And so I've been forcing my way into certain of these groups just to make sure that we do have the ability to convey our concerns around security and protecting data, of which research data just last year was rolled under our data governance process. So researchers, if you're using sensitive or what we call protected data, now need to complete a data governance process request form so that we can evaluate the risks associated with that data and their handling of it, and also look at any kinds of relationships they have with other organizations, including data use agreements, memorandum of agreements and understandings, looking at contract language to ensure that it meets our institution's minimum data security protection requirements. So recently my job is not just about, protecting our data from an information security perspective, but it's now also starting to review contracts for certain language and protections, and also third-party integrations into these systems that are being developed. And so a lot of times we have contracts that actually have very egregious language that says, we as your third-party vendor, we have the ability to keep all of your institutional data for as long as we want and to use in any way that we, the third-party vendor, see fit. And that is absolutely against our institutional policies. So our lessons really are more looking back historically and making sure that we have the avenues to educate. And the other thing is, making sure that we keep on top of the new regulations coming out, such as CMMC, interpreting them on behalf of the institutions in the multitude of different areas, and then interpreting it so that they understand it in our communities. And I think that's the harder part of it. I actually handed the CMMC requirements to one of our research institutions, and I said, here, these are the things that you're going to have to abide by. And he just handed it back and said, I have no idea what this means. And so for the researchers, it is like yet another thing they have to do. But yet it's vitally important that it be done. So how can we help bridge the gap? And Mike at UC San Diego, he actually has done a lot of that, and I'm learning a lot from his implementations with his research facilitation efforts, his Assure program, and trying to help the units actually scope what their risks are as well as where the data sits. Right now, they're very happy to just freely exchange this thing by FTP, not even secure FTP, right? And so we have to educate them as to what you need to do to control the environment that that data touches. And that's a huge lift. And as Mike alluded to, the places where our researchers do their research is all over the place. In the oceans, for us, it's on islands. We have, Coconut Island, where a lot of our marine biology research is conducted. For us, it's on the top of the mountains. We have telescopes, Mauna Kea and Haleakala, and also the research vessels, as Mike also alluded to, is that they're in the ocean collecting all of this data. And what happens when they pull into a port, right? And then they start using whatever network capacity is available for them to start communicating again. So these are all of the things that we have to learn about the projects and then help them interpret CMMC for them. So a lot of lessons learned, and every day we are tweaking what we do to try to be more efficient, to be more communicative, and to be helpful to our research community. But also we talked about earlier is just the lack of clarity as to how we will be applying CMMC to our organizations. If we had to build a secure enclave on behalf of the university, we're talking about, at least $1 million. And to have to build that we're not sure who's going to come and use that. That could be a huge money and time sink that's not necessarily needed. So how do we help scope what the university needs to do in accordance with the research projects and their needs? So.
Thanks, Jodi. I'm just going to give Mike one. I just wanted to follow with Mike, and then we'll jump. There's some questions coming in Q&A, so I'll start to kind of weed through those a little bit while Mike, I've heard you say before, or at least I think you've said this before, that this is a team sport, right? That we're not doing this alone, and it's collaboration not only between the research community and CMMC-AB, but on your campus, as Jodi, as you have alluded to, Mike, you've done some good things with trying to engage the researchers and the grant writers and the contracting office and all of those stakeholders outside of IT to move them toward the CMMC journey. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And by the way, thank you, Jodi. It's worth pointing out, I am a glass half empty guy. So Jodi looks and goes, "Oh, look, you filled the glass up to the 6-ounce line, and all I see are the missing 10." I think many of us are like that in security. Yeah, absolutely. This is going to take enormous participation by your infrastructure people. It's going to take enormous participation. In our case, the broader community really consists of export control, because they obviously keep a sharp eye on contracts, and foreign nationals, and the influence of foreign national personnel on projects is a big concern. The contracts people. My best partner on this, though, has probably been Research Affairs, the Research Compliance and Integrity Office, because they speak to research administrators all the time. And they've done little things like give me portions of their regular newsletter, which speaks to 10,000 people. We've put on 2 training sessions around CMMC in the last year, where we've had, anywhere from 150 to 300 people participate to learn about this. But we also view CMMC as a shared responsibility model. So when I show a little slide on this of who does what, I view the endpoint support of the researcher as being a unit responsibility, because they've got that 1 degree of separation from the researcher. So we've had to work very closely with the major affected units and their IT staff. They sit at the table with us all the time, and they're off testing, zero agent VDI solutions that we'll probably adopt more broadly across campus. So absolutely, everyone you can enlist in this is going to be helpful, all the normal players. And Jodi called out research facilitation. One of the things that most people don't think about is your campus may have people that are playing a research facilitation role. And those are IT people that are working with researchers to help implement IT in their labs. We've partnered very closely with them because they not only have relationships with the faculty, but it's literally their job to help support IT in research environments. So we've really built quite a little community. Do we have more to do? Absolutely. We have to redouble our efforts to talk directly to faculty. But we've brought everyone who has capacity or obligations to the table.
Thanks, Mike. Karlton, I'll give you an opportunity if there's anything you want to add to the Jodi and Mike's comments.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is, and this is one of the, I'm going to put on a slightly different hat for a second, not just CMMC, but some of the conversation it sounds like we're having is merger of IT and the data governance piece. And so one of the things I've seen in my past and recent experience is, the data governance part is given to the IT department. It's not necessarily an IT issue, it's a data issue. And I don't know if you two have done this, but different organizations are creating that chief data officer role where they're looking at these types of things. And there's got to be a convergence of what type of data is important, training people to understand how and why they have to protect the data, and then the IT piece to back in that. And so by way of example, implementing NIST 800-171 in a different organization, the first thing that came down was, hey, IT, this is a problem, you guys got it. And then very quickly it was clear, well, it's not just an IT issue because you have to identify what product forms you have that have CUI associated with it. And so we had to do what it sounds like you guys did, which is create those, extrapolate from the guidance, the things that the everyday user needed, and then provide the right type of information to people who are going to implement the technology solutions. So from that perspective, as I look at CMMC, again, one of the things you guys are giving me more homework. Thank you very much for that. One of the things I'm thinking about is as the guides are being produced to help assess this is where we're going to have, and we've established that, as I said, the ongoing conversations with the licensed practitioners and partners, and the content that needs to come out to help address this particular issue, not just the implementation of CMMC from a technology and standards perspective, but how do you educate the user base in this? So I'm taking that for action to see how we can help.
So I actually have a quick question to build on what you just said, Karlton. And this is to the assessment portion of it. So I believe that a lot of the assessors will be familiar with how you assess an actual DIB organization. So we as higher education, again, we are very different. And we've been doing this with our financial auditors around student financial aid, is we actually do have to work with them to help educate them about our environments and how we're different from normal corporations or businesses. And so I am a little concerned that how the assessors come into higher education institutions and apply the criteria that they do to the defense industrial base might be something that we're interpreting different within a higher education organization. So I guess to my concerns is, would we have the ability to negotiate with them, or is it really a fixed standard that the assessors will be assessing us on? And and let's say we don't pass, what is our avenues for appeals, and how does that get handled? Because we negotiate all the time with our financial auditors. Will we have the same flexibility and capability with the CMMC assessors?
So I'm going to answer that a couple ways and try to be short so we can get to the questions. Man, you guys have given me a lot to unpack. Thank you for all this heavy list stuff. This is great stuff. So to answer your question, one of the initial challenges is having consistency of assessments across the board. And because that consistency is preponderance is the DIB, to your point, you're probably going to have people who are DIB experienced, DIB professionals. What's got to happen, again, to your point, is and again, I'm taking a note on this, how do we then translate that as we go from DIB type organizations to non-standard organizations, i.e. non-DIB? I'm just going to throw this out. I'm not saying that this is how they would do it, but this is what I'm thinking. As an inspector comes in, first of all, if a assessor comes in and they're going to come from a DIB environment to your environment, there has to be that communication education up front. They're either, for example, DIB experts who now can mentally segue into this new environment and understand the culture and dynamics, or maybe we have a segment of the team, the assessment team, that is totally experienced in that environment, which might be the better way. And so that would start. And then as you asked the question about the how do you negotiate? What I'll say is, as the assessments go through and they're completed, then there's a portion at the end where there's the the outbrief, and there's a conversation of how these were assessed, and that's a point where there can be discussion. And then if something were assessed, i.e. from a DIP perspective, that will be put in the calculus. So what I'm going to take back for action, in addition to the other things she gave me, are two things. One, what's the conversation of how do you take non-DIP assessors and get them trained in those environments? Two, how do we get informed of that from this industry so we can make sure we have your concerns addressed? And then how do we, thirdly, have consistency of assessments within this particular segment of the ecosystem?
And,
So,
you know, I would add to that that you have any number of willing participants to help with that crafting of what the non-DIB assessors see and contextualize.
yeah.
Especially those of us that, for reasons of scale or whatever, are not prepared to just say, oh, we'll just all be level 2 and overnight. I've yet to run into anyone in higher ed who has that attitude. So any one of us would be willing to put time into helping with this.
Excellent.
And I'll just, from the questions, trying to follow up on that there. So there was questions around, Karlton, you had mentioned earlier around the academic or academia interface council or advising council. And that's a little bit of where you were sort of headed in that part. So folks were more interested in, as Mike just said, how we can participate, how we can help, how we can engage in that. And then there's a lot of questions that are sort of based in cost or in the Q&A around how do you build, contractors build or include those certification costs into proposals. And then earlier today, Katie had mentioned sort of the audit being an allowable cost. And I think we've seen a lot of sort of questions or uncertainty around that. Again, I don't know that it's something you can answer today here. I appreciate that you're willing to take those back and get us answers to the community if it's something that you can't unpack here.
So what I'll try to do is answer this in this way. Number one of the core tenets of this is it has to be consumable, concise, and most, if not as important, affordable. So affordability is one of the key things we look at. And so the AB has tirelessly looked to find ways to ensure that those certification costs and assessment costs for the OSCs, organizations seeking certification, are as affordable as possible. The industry, the ecosystem is going to drive some of that, but again, in partnership with DoD, we're going to be keeping an eye on that, do our best to make sure that there's no gouging and things like that. So this is where, and again, the costs are not defined specifically yet. Again, the industry is going to drive that. If there are concerns to that end and expectations, anybody can send that into the AB. And if I haven't said this early on, our website is CMMC-AB.org. And on that website, you'll see links to submit emails and so forth, because we're a listening and learning organization. So we do want to hear those inputs. So start sending those to us. And then what I'll lastly say about that is, as we're looking at, once we establish that full range of assessment criteria that's going to be used to verify and validate the controls that are whereby practices are met, we're going to publish data models for tool vendors in particular to help automate a lot of that as much as possible and drive down the costs as much as possible. So there are different things we have in play to help drive down the costs and buy down the risk.
And many of the questions we may just need to capture, get to you from the Q&A so that you can answer more fully. You know, there's one around sort of will grants be subject to CMMC levels soon? And they were talking about most of their most common on-campus then cooperating agreements from the DoD, the SBIRs and STTRs, subcontractors. It really comes down to, we get money from the grants. At what point do you see that being applicable under CMMC? And that may not be something you can address.
Yeah, that wasn't a softball, so I don't really have an answer for that. But if I can get these questions that we're missing, I'll get back and work some answers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's no softballs in the list. I'm trying to go through and not to say that we're intentionally trying to, get you ones you can hit out of the park. It's a complicated issue. It's, our community is really looking for answers. And I think having you here today helps move those answers in the, closer to the surface and in the right direction. So, Mike, Jodi, are there questions that you have that might not be softballs, but might be more articulate for the few minutes we have left?
Not particularly. I mean, none of the, as I think we've discussed, and Jodi, chime in if you think I've got this wrong, I'd say 90% of our questions have to do with trying to remove the fog, the ambiguity about when contracts will be, covered, how far in advance we're going to have to deal with that. I still think we should be talking about the basic and fundamental research exemption. I think that is, and I'm sympathetic to Katie's position that cybersecurity needs to be baked in, but I'm also trying to take a risk-based approach and deal with the fact that we all have limited resources, which got much more limited during COVID. So those are the questions. And I think, as was said earlier, those are mostly on the DoD side to be answered.
Right. And I think from my perspective, I'm really concerned that we as higher education institutions, we're often subcontractors. And it's the large prime contractors that will then flow down their entire CMMC requirements down to us, even though we're working on a very small part of the entire project that may not warrant CMMC level 3. So, are the primes going to also be educated, for lack of a better term, on their ability to change the requirements that they're going to then flow down to us as higher education institutions? As you know, we often had to, with the DFARS 252, we often had to try to negotiate it out where we felt it didn't apply to any of the data that was involved with the project, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. So we would want to make sure that the contracting officers and agencies are also aware of all of these requirements, and not include it broadly in all of our contracts and agreements initially, especially where it's not warranted.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll throw out, and I won't speak for any of the government contracting teams. What I will say is back in, God, it feels like a long time ago, the NEST 171 world, as this was flowing down, there were a lot of those conversations. And I do recall a conversation with some of the contracting teams that they were getting educated into those types of issues. I would submit that by now that's been, if not ingrained, it's really been incorporated into the thinking. But then again, as you go forward, we'll see how it plays out. So I would offer there's still room for conversation on that, and it gets down to again, I still look at it as, and I'm sorry, I have to agree with Katie on it because that's cyber guy. I do agree with baking in cyber as much as possible, but I also understand the informational issues of CUI, and if you don't have it, then do you need to be a level 3? That's why you have a level 1 and level 2. So I think there's going to be room for conversation. I won't promise that, and I believe going forward, both sides will be educated and continue to be educated into asking the right questions as contracts are let.
The one other piece I would toss in related to this, though, is sort of my nightmare scenario is that a very important researcher shows up and wants to compete for a solicitation, but we're on and sort of surprised us by it, so we weren't ready for it, which happens, on every single contracting grant. That even if we do have the capacity to do a certification for that researcher in a hurry, we won't be able to get a hold of an assessor and go through the process quickly enough. So I almost feel like, and I know this may be too difficult logistically, but I feel like there needs to be a break glass scenario where either the certification is, the requirement is delayed until it can be actually accomplished, or there's some small pool of assessors that are available at a you know, on an emergency basis to help us with this scenario.
So I'm taking a note on that mental note. My thought is that there are going to be enough C3PAOs and therefore assessors to help with that. So it may just be a matter, instead of getting a C3PAO location X or assessor through C3PAO location X, you go to location Y. They'll have the flexibility within their own organization to surge people for what I call just-in-time requirements. So, but your point's well taken. So again, I'll take another look at that as well and see what additional options are. But my initial thought is, especially as we get to go for spore time, we'll start surging enough capacity out there to support, and then we'll go from there. But I'll take
it's a chicken and egg problem, and I appreciate the logistical challenge you face, but I just don't want to be in a bad situation because the DoD depends on us as an industry, and I would hate to have that come to a screeching halt.
Understood.
So we're close on time. My last question, and I was going to start with Karlton, but I think we'll continue to do that. Now, three of you can chime in under 5 minutes would be great. And I think we've talked a lot about it. Is really how can we continue to grow or foster that relationship between the CMMC-AB and the higher ed research community. And I know, Karlton, you've hit on a couple of good ideas today. So I want to leave on a positive note. I tend to be more on the Jodi. Let's think about the positives, not the negatives here. And I think this was informative. It was a great dialogue. So I'll let you sort of all three close with that positive go forward attitude.
So before I take my comments, I just want to say thanks a lot for the opportunity. And I would submit that in terms of fostering that relationship, it starts right here, like we're doing today, you know, with a conversation. I've already talked about the advisory council that we're going to open up. So you guys got that. But more opportunities to have this type of dialogue is very important. And again, being able to push that information, those questions to the AB. We are, as I said, a learning organization. We want to hear and we want to listen to your thoughts and concerns. So start sending those, and more is more. And as we build this out, we'll take those into consideration. And the notes I took today will help to inform how we can answer some of the things you've already asked. So thanks again for the opportunity. It's been great.
No, I just want to tell everybody here on the call, thank you for joining us. I've seen a lot of questions coming in. And as you can tell, a lot of those are our own questions too. So one of the things definitely we want to try to do, as Mike said, is to eliminate some of the fog surrounding some of it. I think a lot of our assumptions are largely because of the rumor mill, as Katie alluded to, but really it's the more we can engage with the dialogue with the CMMC advisory board, such as yourself, Karlton, and really thank you very much for being here and allowing us the opportunity to share our views with you and then take it back, and so that we can continue this ongoing dialogue. And kudos to Mike. I am so envious about you and your efforts over there at UCSD. We're working towards it. We are working with our research services offices and our research compliance office. But again, it really is a slow process, right? So walk, right? And so we're kind of a little past the crawl. We're kind of on the lumbering walk stage. It'll take us a while to get to the run stage, but thank you very much for having us and allowing me to be on my soapbox a little bit. So thanks.
Yeah, I just echo that. Thank you very much, Karlton. It's been terrific. I can't tell you how meaningful it is to us that you engage like this and are so open to a little bit of what Katie called whining. Hopefully not too much. Brian, thank you and EDUCAUSE for putting this together. It's been really helpful for me. And
also to Sanjeev.
Sanjeev, thank you. And PreVeil.
So I was going to thank, on behalf of Sanjeev and PreVeil, thank you, Karlton, for stepping in and doing a great job and engaging with us. Jodi and Mike, as always, thank you for being part of this community today. I just wanted, the reminder is on the screen for our partner, the partner breakout sessions. Those that have registered or requested meetings, you should have already received the dial-in information. If you haven't, you can hang around here and put in chat that you need that information, and we'll get that to you. Just again, the reminder, the session was recorded, so that we'll put that out on the PreVeil site as soon as we have that. And Karlton will send along the homework with the FAQs and we'll keep you on speed dial. And we appreciate your openness and willingness to work with us. So thanks so much. And thanks everyone. Have a great rest of your day.